advice given is for general information purposes. All legal cases are different, and you should seek the advice of your own attorney before acting or making decisions. No attorney-client privilege applies to communications on this show, and no attorney-client relationship is created by calling or writing in. Attorney Rominger practices only in Pennsylvania and maintains his primary office in Carlisle, Pennsylvania.
Hey, good afternoon. Carl Rominger here, coming live from the WHP 580 studios. If you have a legal question, 540-0580, 540-0580. Call in. We'll answer them here on the air. Of course, as you guys know, we answer all your legal questions. I'm going to touch later in the hour on some intellectual property rights as they apply to the use of images and art, as well as whether or not animals have standing to protect their image. But for the first hour here, I've got Mark Virginis. Mark, how are you? Mark. Do I have Mark? You know what? We have a caller button down again. Was the doctors in here this morning again? Were the doctors in here? Yes. The doctors, for some reason, turned the caller button down, and they've created more mischief over the years in the WHP 580 studios than any other group of people. Shane will vouch for that, I think. He can't officially say anything, but I can. Anyhow, Mark, I've got you.
Okay, good. Glad to be with you, Carl.
I know you have to give a disclaimer. Mine's automated into the beginning, so give yours.
I am an investment advisor representative offering securities and advisory services through Financial Network Investment Corporation, member SIPC. Marist Financial Partners, that's the name of my firm, and the Financial Network are not affiliated. Neither Marist Financial Partners nor Financial Network gives tax or legal advice.
All right. Sounds like a great warning. All right, Mark, we're going to take some calls in a minute. I don't know what kind of calls we're going to get, but we'll take them over, whether they're legal issues or what. Since we have you on, because people should know that you can answer general questions in the financial realm as well, retirement, markets, things like that, all subject to the same caveats I give people, which is, we're probably not going to have enough information that you should act on it, but if you want to get some thoughts, we're here for you.
Right.
So this is 2012. I guess everybody's been watching the stock market and the other financial markets, and of course we know that the pigs are still in the tank, so to speak. So tell me what's going on.
Well, at the present time, the volatility you saw from last year, and again, this is my 2 cents that I'm telling my clients, is here to stay. Even though the S&P hasn't moved more than 1% up or down since we started the year, don't get faked by that. It's probably going to be here. We're going to see 200-300-point days up, down in the very near future here. But basically, there's 5 themes I'm telling folks to look at as they move ahead, and then I have 10 investment themes to apply to those 5 big picture tasks, if you will. First and foremost, what's the pace of the global recovery, the global economic recovery in its whole. Now, this report's I will say this, Carl. This report that I have is 13 pages long. So if folks want to get a copy of this report, if they want to read for themselves, all they got to do is give me a call. I'll be happy to shoot one out to them via email, or better yet, I'll probably put it in hard copy in the mail to them. So I'll briefly touch on these 5: the pace of the global economic recovery, the fiscal consolidation and debt reduction on both sides of the Atlantic, so that means us as well as Europe.
Right.
Inflation or its absence, and I'll explain that, market volatility, and last but not least, all eyes are going to be on us because of the presidential election, and I think you might have even touched on this. There's going to be more money spent on this presidential election than there ever was before. So those are basically the 5 themes. I don't know if you want to take a call or not, and we can come back to these.
Yeah, let's take a call. And I also want to tell people, if obviously they want to get a hold of you and are having trouble doing that, because we'll give away your contact information in a minute. I also have put a link up to you on Facebook, on my Facebook page, so anybody who uses my Facebook can go ahead and pop in there and just link right through to you and send you a shout-out right on Facebook as well.
Well, thank you very much.
Not a problem. Gail, you're on with Carl and Mark. What's your question?
Hi, Carl. I have a question about FMLA. I understand it's mandatory for companies with 50 or more employees. Is that correct?
That sounds correct to me.
Okay. My brother needs a bone marrow transplant, and my employer's telling me that it doesn't extend to siblings. Do you know if that's true?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head.
Okay. And my real question is, the company I work for probably has 150 employees, but they have multiple corporations inside it, and they choose who they want, what company's going to pay you. So because of that, there are not 50 in one group. So
right.
That's proper for them. Not proper, but that's...
I don't know if the FMLA has a test or not. A lot of times we'll do things in law where we'll say, okay, you can structure things certain ways, but we're not going to let you call it something. So, for instance, if a guy wants to just call himself an independent contractor and the employer wants to call him an independent contractor, we look at how the relationship's structured to decide if that's really true or not. So whether or not there's an aggregation of the corporations and where the control flows, because what you're basically saying is that everybody's acting as a unit, but there's more than one company, and who's paid by who, we don't know. This is something we'd have to do a little digging on for you.
Okay.
But off the top of my head, obviously you've got two potential issues. One is, how far does it extend?
Right.
The Family Medical Leave Act. Does a sibling count? And you're going to be providing the bone marrow, or
correct.
Yeah, so
the donor, right?
So it's not like you're simply just asking to go, stand around at the hospital for a few weeks.
Right, it shouldn't be any more than 2 weeks,
mm-hmm.
Right.
And at the same time, you've got a second overlay. And this is a common problem, actually. A lot of times when people have a factual scenario, and Mark, it's probably the same thing in the world of finance.
Right.
Somebody says, "Here's what I'm thinking," and then you got two different things you got to deal with. And here's the second hoop, which is whether or not they have 50 employees for purposes of FMLA. Or there may be other laws that could apply that could help you as well, and I don't know the answer to that. So,
okay,
we'll take a little research, Gail. If you want to touch us offline, I'd be happy to look into it for you.
Thank you so much. Have
All
a
right,
good day.
take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, Mark, those FMLA questions come up quite a bit, and I sometimes wish I knew more of it off the top of my head.
Well, it's an interesting one because a lot of in the world of finance, you get into 401ks. You get a guy who owns a company and he owns part of another company. And the Department of Labor has been very clear that if you own 90% of another company, guess what? Everybody has to be brought in from another company into your original company's 401k. So they think, your point was really well received when you said, are those corporations aggregated, or do they just want to call them separate or subsidiaries? That does take a little bit more due diligence, and I'm glad she called. I think she needs to really have your assistance on that one.
Yeah, it's just something I think we'd have to dig up on the side. The other thing is, I'd be surprised. I mean, the employer saying they don't want to give her a leave. My theory is large employers with 150 people, obviously everybody's essential, but it's easier to cover. It's not like a 10-man shop where they're like, we're losing 10% of our labor force if you take 2 weeks off.
Right.
But who knows? Who knows? And, of course, that also goes to the culture of the different companies, because some companies are much easier with their employees than others.
Right. And they have a strong, HR department. That person in the HR department is not going to let some VP override them. They're going to say, no, this is what we got to do.
Right. So let me ask you a couple of questions. So let's go with our first point in your report here.
Okay. The pace of global economic recovery, and you can tie in the fiscal consolidation, the money consolidation, and debt reduction. It's kind of hand in hand, but basically you hear about austerity, and most folks know that that just means governments are going to pull back on spending. In some of these European countries, they buy a lot of our goods. So when the government spends money on their societies over there, you call them the pigs, and just for folks out there, he means Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain, PIIGS. When folks over there don't have the money to buy our goods, that slows our economy down. So that's why we call it the global recovery, because we're coming out. The government says we're out of recession, but it doesn't feel too much like a recovery. We only grew by 1.2% real GDP versus everybody thought we'd be at 3.2. But in any case, when less cash is flowing into the system, especially over in Europe, that's going to put a strain on their overall economic recovery. In fact, I look at them as growing probably at 1% or much less than 1%. In fact, a real global or European recession, if they're not in it already, is very, very, very much in reality could really happen. If that happens, that's going to slow our overall growth down again, because Europe you're talking about 17 countries in the euro. That's a lot of countries. That's a lot of people not buying goods and services from us. So that's what I want to really tell people. And even here, if we really start cutting back overall, and especially the automatic cuts, because the super committee couldn't agree on anything,
right.
Those automatic cuts kick in, that's going to slow our recovery. No one could point to any of the stimulus since 2008, all the stimulus money that was put in. no one can point to, hey, this created a job, this created a long-standing job, this improved the economy. No one can point to any real numbers that show that, not the government, not politicians or what have you. So we had a ton of money flow into the system. The question is, where is it? It's, in my opinion, it's being hoarded by banks right now. They're not lending it out, and that's another problem too. That gets into a different discussion. When's housing going to come back?
Let's
But go ahead.
Yeah, I want to talk to you a little bit about that after the break here. Can you hold with me?
Sure.
All right, we'll be right back. Hey, welcome back. I've got Mark Virginis here. And, Mark, we're going to take a call here real quick here. 540-0580 if you want to ask Mark a financial question or me a legal question, or if you want to combine the two topics, we don't care. 540-0580. Call in and we'll talk. Patty, you're on with Carl and Mark.
Hi, Carl, Mark. My question is in regards to employer responsibility when an employee gets hurt and it's due to a negligence on the part of the company. What is can the employee sue their employer?
I've got the easy answer. In most states, Pennsylvania included, whether your employer is negligent or not is irrelevant. You can't sue them for negligence. But if you are injured at work or carrying out your job responsibilities off-site, you will be able to collect or would be eligible for workers' compensation. The trade-off is workers' compensation does not include a pain and suffering component. It includes medicals and wage replacement. The upside for the employee is even if you're the idiot that sticks both hands in the machine, you still get workers' compensation. So we see these things where employees will sometimes go ahead and say, oh, I'm going to turn the safety thing slows me down, so I'm going to turn the safety device off, and then they end up running their hand through it. Well, in the old days, the employer would say, hey, you were negligent, so too bad.
Right.
These days, you get workers' compensation whether it's your fault or not, so you don't have to prove negligence on the part of the employer. Now, there's two other things that come into that, though. One is if you're intoxicated or high, that can vitiate workers' compensation if you're injured as a result of those. That's a famous way to get out when the guy falls off the scaffolding. And usually, there's an old joke in the business about the guys who work the high steel. Maybe they smoke a little marijuana, so they fall off 20 stories, die, and of course they always look for some THC in their blood. And about half the time it seems like they find it, and then of course they say, well, we don't have to pay the widow anymore. The other caveat is, remember I talked about getting injured at work, you can still sue third parties. So I have a lot of people who don't realize this, but let's say you're in your company car going across the company parking lot or going between buildings or locations to take some parts or something over, and somebody else hits you. You get your workers' compensation, but you can still sue the person who hit you for pain and suffering, as well as the portion of your wages that aren't covered by workers' compensation. So that's a long answer to your question, but I think it covers it.
Yes, it does. The only thing that I have concerns with, mostly in the manufacturing end of employment, is that companies can be negligent. And even if you say to your supervisor, this equipment is faulty, blah, 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 whatever, and they don't do anything about it, they have no responsibility to...
I had a case where the employer manhandled a woman. I mean, literally drug her into a room. And I don't mean like a man did it, like a couple other women there to force her into an exit interview. Because she was quitting because she wasn't happy with the way things were run at this company. It was a large hospital. And we alleged in our lawsuit that they had assaulted her and battered her, and amongst other things, which is an intentional tort. And the Pennsylvania Superior Court and the trial court still found that the workers' compensation was the exclusive remedy. And as I argued, I said, this basically means that Tony Soprano can grab an employee, beat him up, break their arm, and all they can sue him in is workers' compensation. And there was a dissent, I shouldn't say a dissent, but a concurrence by two of the judges from the Superior Court who said our Supreme Court should take a look back at the law as they've created it. But, the business lobby being what it is, I don't think the legislature wants to reopen it, and I don't think the Supreme Court's going to touch it either.
I see. Interesting. So you don't think they'll relook at that law?
I don't think. I think it's going to stay the way it is because everybody wants to keep it a bright line. Basically, the only time I'm aware of in the line of cases it involves was a company where people were being tested for lead in their blood, and the employer intentionally lied about the blood results. They work in a battery factory where they're exposed to a lot of lead, and the employer intentionally changed the results, and as such, they were occupationally exposed to lead. And there, the Supreme Court said, well, the conduct was so egregious, and the employer were acting so willfully that we'll say that the workers' compensation exclusivity clause doesn't apply. Now, if you read the law, it's pretty simple, right? It says negligence, and it says it applies. You can't sue your employer for negligence. But our Supreme Court has seemed to have read that word negligence to include a lot of intentional torts historically, or at least arguably. I actually had a fight about this with another attorney from another state not too long ago who said, oh, well, you can get around workers' comp easy if it's outside of negligence. And I'm like, well, welcome to Pennsylvania. Let me explain to you our decisional line.
Yeah. Okay, so, well, you answered my question very well, and I appreciate it, but I really do think we need to look at that law.
And Patty, just remember, if you ever know anybody that is injured at work, they need to not only aggressively pursue their workers' compensation remedies, because I'm amazed by how many people go, well, my employer said I shouldn't file for workers' compensation. And I'm like, well, you need to. But number two is make sure that they do look for those third parties, because that's where they can also collect additional amounts. So we had a products liability case where the employer did put somebody to work on a product line and the machine was malfunctioning, and they tried to bring it to the employer's attention and they didn't care.
Right,
and they got injured. Well, not only did they get workers' comp from the employer, but we ultimately sued the manufacturer of the machine and settled the case because they had some liability as well. The thing that broke on the machine, or the problem with the machine, was their problem. So the fact that the employer made them stay on was foreseeable, actually, because there's a lot of bad employers out there, and that was our defense to that for people who go, well, how's the manufacturer of the machine going to know that an employer would make somebody use it broken? Well, the answer is that's pretty foreseeable, right?
Right. Well, now, can that third party go back and sue the employer?
That's an interesting question, and that I don't know the answer to, but to argue an indemnification type argument, and I think the answer is potentially yes, but I don't know.
Interesting, isn't it?
I don't know.
That would be up to the attorney then to go to the third party and say, listen, this is what happened because of negligence
on your part,
employer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and that's interesting because they don't have an employee-employer relationship. On the other hand, they don't have a personal injury themselves, so they don't have a negligence claim per se, because you have to have personal injury. There's no such thing as negligence between two businesses over a contract or other theory. So we'd have to get somewhere besides negligence to collect. But now I'm just talking out my you know what. So, all right.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right, Patty. Take care.
All right. You too.
540-0580, Carl Rominger here with Mark Virginis. If you have a legal question or a financial question, call in. We'll answer them here on the air. Mark's going to be with us, I think, until about 2 o'clock. I'm going to be here until 3 o'clock. So if you're driving around somewhere and you don't have a time, just jot down the number 540-0580. Get out here and ask us your question. Now, Mark, I want to turn back to all things financial here for a second. We're talking about this austerity, and we're talking about the government's killing government spending. And I think I saw that Spain, for instance, already is not meeting its own internal targets for revenue, and in part because of the cuts they've made, and now they're going to make another series of cuts.
Yeah, I mean, in Spain, Greece was in the news last year around May, and that's when the market took, we had our April highs, and then May is when it started to turn around. Greece is, if it's the pinky, it's the small little toe on the foot. Spain probably is the big toe, to give your listeners an idea. Spain's the big whammy. They have a lot of debt. We're talking about a lot of debt. And there's the conundrum. I've listened to, several conference calls from PIMCO and Fidelity and Eaton Vance and some of these people who collectively are in the trillions of dollars, if you throw them all together, managing money, especially in the fixed income market, which is your bond market, which is what we're talking about really here. And their feelings are that they're going to push these countries to do as much austerity, as much debt reduction. They're going to put a gun to their head all the way. They're going to take them to the brink. and then the ECB, the European Central Bank, is going to come in riding on a white horse and not going to let anybody leave the euro and not going to let anybody default. There is a theory out there they're going to let Greece default because in all actuality they pretty much have already. But nobody wants Spain or Italy to default because the only thing that can send this market, in my opinion, to a tailspin down would be if you start hearing the word France. If newscasters start bringing up France as being a problem with their debt, all bets are off. I'd be running to cash at that point. And I don't mean to scare folks or something like that, but I'm just telling you now, France is the one right now, along with Germany, that's seen as trying to bail a lot of these folks out. Germany much more so than France, but if we start hearing that France is in trouble, that's a big problem for us over here, especially in our stock market. And just about all your listeners have a 401k, a pension, an IRA, or some kind of money in the market, so to speak, that they want to pay. They want to pay attention to that stuff.
And of course, France did come up a little bit because I believe, was it S&P downgraded them to a AA plus from AAA? Does that sound right?
Yeah, and that's in those guys are never out ahead of stuff. The other rating agencies like your Moody's and Fitch, they all follow each other.
Right.
So, I mean, you're probably going to get a series of downgrades. And even when that happened, look what happened with our market. Yeah, we were down like 120, 140 points. We wound up the day like down 50. It's almost, I hate to say, haven't we been to this movie before? But it's really not affecting us the way it did affect us before. And I think folks, all eyes are turning to us because we're the world economy. We're the largest economy. We got a presidential election that's definitely going to affect the economy, and that things are getting better over here. They don't feel like it, but things truly are getting better over here from an economic standpoint. So right now, a lot of eyes are watching us, and you're just, if you turn on CNBC or Yahoo Finance or MSN Money or whatever, and they always give this, on European worries, and so forth. That's getting to be old hat with a lot of folks. The rumors just aren't doing it and moving the market the way it did last year. But if there comes the time where some really bad news comes out of Europe, or they can't auction off their bonds, or something happens, or they have to get a really high yield for those bonds, then you're going to see our market move. And that's why I said volatility is here to stay, because I believe we are going to get some bad news this year. I don't believe they're going to solve their problems. I think they're going to kick the can down the road for another 4 or 5 years. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. And
when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as a downward spiral potentially. 540-0580, Carl Rominger here, calling with your legal questions or financial questions for Mark Virginis. See you after the break. Welcome back. Carl Rominger here, 540-0580, answering your legal questions. I got Mark Virginis here. We're doing a little financial overview here for the year, just kind of chawing the fat, so to speak. 540-0580, calling with your legal question, whatever you want to talk about, divorce, custody, personal injury, need to sue somebody, let me know. Happy to help, 540-0580. Or if you want to ask Mark a financial question, if you have one of these things in your head, should I be buying gold like Glenn Beck? Should I be stocking up on some particular stock? Mark might be the guy to ask here if you have those questions, so feel free to fire one off, 540-0580. The other thing I wanted to touch base with Mark is how do people get a hold of you off the air if they want to find you? What's the best way?
Well, thanks, Carl. If folks want to get a hold of me, of course, in the Central PA, 717-509-4521. That's 509-4521. Or they can go ahead and on my website, they can email me from there, and that's mirusfinancialpartners.com, and Mirus is M as in Mark, IRUS, Financial Partners, and partners is plural.com.
Now, I'm going to, maybe some of the talk radio listeners out here will come and talk to us about this, because I'm going to bring something that's near and dear to a few of their hearts, and it's called sovereign debt. A lot of people who listen to the radio here, and I'll call them Tea Partiers, would tell you that government debt is bad and you have to cut debt immediately. Mm-hmm. But part of what I hear the problem is as the sovereigns, the United States, for instance, and our states have cut employees off the payrolls, as we've knocked back our spending. That's rippled through our own economy, and that's now what's happening in the Europeans as they go into these austerity budgets. It lowers the economic activities in the country, which then lower the revenues, and it potentially, while you need to cut some of your expenses, cutting your debt load too fast can have the opposite effect of pushing the revenues down too fast.
Right. If we pulled your podcast from about a year and a half ago, we were talking about unemployment numbers and how high could it go. And I said, watch when our federal government stops funding some of these mandates down to the state and the state down to the municipalities and boroughs and townships. I said, you're going to have states starting to lay folks off, mass size, lots of layoffs. And those folks are going to be off of the payrolls, and they're going to be looking for jobs. I said, so the next round of layoffs is coming. And, you and I discussed it, and no one's really thought of that. Well, here it's rearing its head right now, albeit in Europe. And I do believe, if from the Tea Party side, as I think the Democrats are hearing that loud and clear, as well as the Republicans are hearing it loud and clear, it'll be very interesting to see what they cut and how much they cut. You hear about the space program,
right?
The whole, there's a rocket scientist out of a job. But yeah, you have, especially in the military. Let's remember, everyone's happy we're coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, now these guys are going back to their other jobs, the jobs that aren't there. And maybe from a legal standpoint, you can tell folks that if they are coming back, they are supposed to have their job that they left, whether it be Army Reserves or what have you. But, you're going to have an influx of folks. I mean, you have over 13 million right now unemployed, and that's not the underemployed where folks just took a part-time job because they wanted to have money come in and they used to be full-time. 13 million is you don't have a job.
Right.
So you're absolutely right, Carl. These are going to be some tough times in the next 2 to 3 years here.
And I did see in the unemployment data that about half the people who are unemployed have been unemployed for a long time. Right,
and that's scary too, because you hear about the 99 weeks of unemployment, and folks are, especially if you have a friend who's like that, and you're like, well, you should get unemployment. That's what the government should do. But at the same time, 99 weeks of unemployment, those of us who have a job or who aren't shedding a tear for those folks are saying, you mean you can't find something?
Right.
Whether it be the Gap, McDonald's, Walmart, you can't find something? I mean, and that gets to the point where depends on whose glasses you're looking through, you know what I mean? How you see the world. Do you see it as the government should help that person until they get back on their feet and the jobs recover and manufacturing comes back and blah, 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 blah? Or are you someone who's looking at the world saying, hey, you know what, if I had to, I work 3 jobs delivering pizzas if I had to give my family what they need. It's just different cultures and different ways people are looking at their careers.
The other issue, I guess, in the unemployment data as well would be, we hear a little bit about this. We have job starts of like 200,000, but I'm told that 150. If you have only 150,000 a month, that actually will just flatline the numbers of unemployment, because that's the actual growth in the economy every month. That you have to have about 150,000 jobs because there's that many more people being born and coming into the workforce.
Yeah, and that's why we take a census every 10 years, amongst other things. You're absolutely right. And you think to yourself, well, what do we need to get down to where this economy is really humming along and growth's really good? And typically, if you're running unemployment around 4 or 5%, you could say you're at employment, that you're fully employed. I guess, with the Iowa caucuses were going on, Iowa has a very almost like a non-existent unemployment rate. I mean, they're at 5% statewide.
Right.
And the governor was on TV saying, I have businesses coming up to me and said, find me the skilled workers, find me the people. I have a job for them. I can't, and that's been another thing that's come out with this unemployment is I can't find the people with the right skills. So you would think your trade schools, you would think your junior colleges, Harrisburg area community college is a great asset that we have in central Pennsylvania. There's a lot of ways to go out and get a little bit more experience through school that might make you much more attractive to employers that are out there now. And I don't think folks have really taken a hard look at that. And I think maybe HAC needs to step up and really advertise or market that fact for folks.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the problem with retraining is there's a good lag in the time from people when people start doing it until they can actually come online.
Most definitely, maybe a year or two, but still, I mean, it's like I told my wife, doing what I do, you could parachute me anywhere in the country, and I can do what I do,
right?
Because of the skills that I have, and the same thing for you as a lawyer, what have you, and there's certain skills out there where carpenters or people who of the trades, you could put them in. Now, is there employer for them? Is there work for them? That's a different story, but
right. What else do you see as important for people to be considering in 2012 with the financial picture?
Well, I would say, what we have over in Europe is real important. We talked about that, the volatility that's going to be here for folks. For those who need to be in the market, who need to have some growth, whether you're young or middle-aged, or you just don't have enough to save for retirement, so you can't go hide in bonds because, that's below 2%. So where am I going to get my return? Can't put it in a CD at the bank. The 5-year national average for a CD I saw last week was below 2%. So, I mean, come on. You don't want to, with inflation being at 2 in taxes on that money, you're actually negative growth if you really think about it on a CD. So I'm looking at my folks. I'm doing much United States first, large companies that pay dividends. Nice way to play that is through mutual funds. There's several very good companies out there that have mutual funds that have dividend in their name. That should give you a hint that they pay dividends. Because remember, with stocks can grow in appreciation, meaning someone's paying more for the stock. But by the same token, that stock can pay a dividend or return money to shareholders, so you can gain money that way. Especially in a retirement plan, you can just reinvest that stuff. You can reinvest the earnings and the appreciation, and I think companies are going to want to make themselves more attractive to investors. If they're not going to spend it on hiring people, they're going to spend it on buying equipment or paying a dividend. Ford's the one that everyone has been talking about with their dividend that they've been paying, but larger is better, and dividend paying is best, in my opinion.
Mark, let's take a caller here quick. 540-0580. Legal questions for me, financial questions for Mark. Jay, what's your question?
Who are you talking to?
Jay.
Yeah, okay. Hey, actually, and the one thing I could hear you clearly, I was listening on a speakerphone. Mark was, got to project there, Mark.
I'm called in, that's why.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it makes a difference. Trust me, when I'm on Durgan, sometimes people are like, would you speak up? And I'm like, eh.
Yeah. A couple of things, actually.
Can I take a break?
The one was a legal thing. You had talked a little bit earlier about the fact that an employee didn't have the right to sue an employer for negligence or other issues, even if it had nothing to do with the work, if somebody beat you up.
Right.
Does that apply? However, what's the definition of an employer? Could I sue the person individually or take them to court individually as well, if they were my supervisor or any kind of management person, there wouldn't be any
you potentially
problem
could,
there, right?
Well, the short answer is I believe on negligence claims in the scope of employment, yes, they can get out. For intentional torts, I believe you're okay, and generally that's been allowed. So if your coworker slugs you, that's one thing. If your manager knocks you off the forklift, that's different. Jay, I got to take a break here. Hold on.
Okay.
540-0580. Carl Rominger here. Mark Virginis answering your questions.
Give us an ear.
Welcome back. Carl Rominger here with Mark Virginis. Hey, Mark, I think I have a question on life insurance here. So, John, shoot.
My question is, my wife's grandmother died, and I think I know. Well, the problem is I know just enough to be dangerous. But my question is, the life insurance policy, I take it, is non-taxable. But there was also an annuity involved, and whoever she talked to, I think it was an attorney, told her the annuity would be tax deferred if she put part of it in her 401k and part of it in mine. Does that make sense? Is that correct?
I have never heard that before. Annuities are tax deferred to the person who has them while they're living. At death, that's when Uncle Sam gets paid. And as Carl will tell you from the estate planning side of things, There's income tax due on anything above the cost basis of an annuity, whether it's a fixed annuity, variable annuity, or indexed annuity. That's typically how it runs. Now, 401ks are allowed to hold annuities in them. That was changed by the government about a year and a half ago, so they can do that. But when that trigger, I'm guessing she was not. Was your wife joint owner or joint annuitant with her mother or grandmother?
Gee, boy, that's a question I can't answer. It was something that was left in, and this was, I guess, part of her will was.
Yeah, so an annuity has
amount of money went to whoever.
Yeah, annuities have a named beneficiary, so that's a contract, kind of like a life insurance. So they go right to where they're.
Well, it would have been named to her son, who would have been my wife's father, who is deceased.
Okay. And Grandma never changed the beneficiary designation.
That I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, this might be a situation where, I'd probably need to see a little bit more of the facts and see the actual.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like it needs to be mapped out on paper because, you could, let me give you an example, just to give you a real short one. You can have life insurance and it's tax-free, right? But if you point it to an estate or you send it through the right hoops, you could create tax on it, either an estate tax or an income tax.
Well, I think that was all. I think it was done very well. I mean, it was all separate deals. I mean, there was a life insurance policy, and then there was the annuity, and then there's a will after all of that of a large sum of property and stuff. But that's still in all paying all
Gotcha.
stuff and all that kind of stuff.
Mark, what number could John call you off the air to give you some specifics?
Yeah, John, you can give me a call. I'll be in my office in the afternoon on Monday. 509-4521. That's 509-4521.
Okay. Yeah, I think we need to do that because we're just not sure what to do with what at this point.
Yeah, John, follow up with Mark, and then if there's anything I need to do, let me know. I'm going to let you go, John. We're going to take one more call because we're running out of time for Mark here.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John. Mike, you're on with Carl and Mark. Hey, Mike.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, how are you?
Doing good, thank you.
Obviously, I've invested, I think, wisely over the course of 27 years of continuing to work with, company match 401ks, stocks out on my own, everything except, I've never dabbled in the gold play, and, I was just wondering your opinion on that at this point.
I'm a big believer in everyone owning some gold. I always use it as an inflation hedge. I never really looked at it as for my clients anyway, I never really looked at it as I'm going to invest in gold because I'm going to make some money at it, as an actual holding that way. I use it as an overall diversifier, asset allocation in the portfolio, because gold, typically metals, natural resources, commodities, that's what we're talking about here. They non-correlate. They don't act like other stuff. So when you build a portfolio, you don't want to just put all stocks in there because the stock market takes a hit and goes down, then your whole portfolio goes down. So you try to put stuff in the portfolio, stocks, bonds, emerging market, REITs, and different things within it. So when something zigs, something zags. So when I look at gold, I do believe gold's going higher. I do think there's more turbulence over in Europe and here, so I would be a buyer of gold even at $1,600 an ounce now. However, remember, the only way you're buying gold is someone selling it. So at some point, someone actually made their money in gold, and they need a buyer for it. I have been leaning more towards the certain respected gold mutual funds, because not only do they get into the futures of the gold, the actual physical gold, some of them do, but they'll also buy the miners of. So if everybody else wants gold, somebody has to go dig it out of the ground and get it. And like Barrick Gold and some of the other companies. So those gold funds have done very, very well, just as the pure price of gold has done very, very well. So that might be an interesting way to play it for you, as opposed to just buying, the ETF or physical gold from like one of these companies you hear on the radio or TV that's selling it. I'd be more apt to point my client. I do point my clients more to a mutual fund that's solely based in gold or in the precious metals. So don't forget about copper and silver as well.
Gotcha. Okay, great. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, Mike, take care. You know, Mark, we're probably out of time here, so I know I'm going to be here for the next hour answering legal questions, and I got Ben and Mark holding, and I'll grab them probably right after the break here. How much time do I have left, Shane? 30 seconds, yeah. So, Mark, one more time, in case somebody wants to get a hold of you and has a financial question, what's the phone number?
Phone number is 509-4521, and Monday being Martin Luther King Day, I'll probably be in the afternoon, so like after 12 o'clock on Monday if folks want to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and I'm sure if they wanted to call right now and leave a message, they could do that, and you'd call them back, too. So.
Absolutely, and I'm leaving your show, and I'm heading on to St. Anthony's of Padua to go volunteer for the spaghetti dinner, so I may not be able to get to their phone call right away, but hey, I'll get you on Monday.
All right, my friend, thank you very much.
No, thank you. It's Carl. Have a great weekend.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Anyhow, guys, I'll be back for the next hour to answer your legal questions. So, Ben, Mark, be patient here. It'll be a few minutes, and I'll get you on the air. And then anybody else wants to call in, 540-0580. Carl Rominger answering your legal questions. And throughout the week, if you need a lawyer, go to romingerlaw.com. Or if you want our free will kit, go to weekendappointment.com. I'll see you guys in a minute.